This is Fred Passman. I'm the commander of Continental Commandery, Naval Order of the United States, and welcome you to the August program of our Maritime History Virtual Lecture Series. For those of you who might be our visitors or guests or joining us for the first time, I just want to mention again that the mission of the Naval Order is to preserve, promote, and celebrate our nation's maritime history, and that includes all aspects of that maritime history. And to learn more, you can go to the Naval Order website or Continental Commandery's website to check out what's happening at the commandery level and at the national level. I will mention this evening that we're just about 2 months out from our annual National Congress, which will be taking place in San Diego beginning 19 October. And I encourage everybody who is not yet already registered to join us in San Diego to do so. It's one of my favorite cities to visit. And I confess that I often have reunions with brain cells left behind as an ensign and JG in beautiful San Diego some time ago. Tonight's speaker is Kempton Baldridge. Kempton has spent much of his, or started off life in Delaware, but spent his formative years in Belgium. We'll come back to that later on this evening. He's also lived in the Marshall Islands, Kentucky, Michigan, and Saipan. He earned his bachelor's degree in history from Johns Hopkins University in 2010, where he was nominated for the Kugel Prize in History for his senior thesis, all on Guadalcanal. We've discussed that in previous lectures. He has a bachelor's in science and maritime technology from Great Lakes Maritime Academy, where he graduated in 2017. He has in his merchant marine career, has been aboard ships in the Great Lakes, freighters in the Great Lakes, a historical car ferry, and other dinner cruise vessels. And right now he's works aboard a workboat that serves the petroleum industry. When not sailing, Kempton lives in Baltimore, Maryland, and contributes research to Eric Wertheim's Proceedings column, Combat Fleets of the World. So, Kempton, I want to welcome you aboard this evening. I look forward to welcoming you aboard as a companion. Before long, we were made aware of Kempton by his dad, who is a Continental companion. So we look forward to working together with you over the long term. So you majored in history and then decided you wanted to become a merchant mariner. What inspired that?
Well, I come from my grandfather went to Kings Point, so it's always sort of been part of family lore. My other grandfather also served in the Navy during World War II. And of course, my dad is, anyone who knows him knows that if it floats, he likes it. And that is truly, I mean that broadly, because he's retired Navy chaplain and went into ministry for a little bit, but you couldn't keep him off things that floated and certainly keep him away from chaplaincy. So it's something I certainly grew up with, but in terms of why, when you spend all your time history writing about events, after a certain point, you're interested in perhaps seeing what it's actually like. And of course, you can't recreate historical events, but to actually work on vessels does give me a better understanding, especially after writing about Guadalcanal and the Navy from the Ford to Reagan administrations. And it just fosters better understanding of what I studied.
Excellent. I'll just mention we're having some technical difficulties with you. Your screen froze up, and we might have to have you reboot before we turn over the deck and the con. Would you like to give that a quick try?
Yeah, exit and reappear.
Try to exit and reappear. So while we're waiting for Kempton, that's right. It's always a pleasure to have folks who are still active in the fleet, whether it be our merchant fleet or our Navy or Marine Corps. If you know of folks that are still on active duty or actively serving in the Merchant Marine, please, we encourage you to encourage them to get involved with the Naval Order. And Kempton's back, terrific. All right, I want to, at this point, give you the deck and the con and let you go ahead and begin your presentation.
All righty. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm honored to give this presentation. This is something that it's certainly been not near and dear, but it's something that I talk about with other merchant mariners and classmates of mine. So the recruitment and retention challenges facing the merchant marine and it's a very real concern, and I think that there are some solutions. It's gonna, let's see what I can come up with. So I'm also going to touch on the Jones Act and flags of convenience tonight. And this picture right here is of me with some other deckhands. This is one of my first vessels as a third mate, and that's the backdrop of Cleveland aboard the motor vessel Sam Laud. So I wanted to start with a summation of the manning problem that the U.S. Merchant Marine is currently facing. So this on the screen is a quote from the posture statement given by General Van Ovest of the U.S. Transportation Command. Basically, U.S. Merchant Marine manpower levels need to be checked on from time to time. And as it recovers post-COVID, there are significant recruitment and retention issues that need to be addressed. So these are the main points I will be making tonight. First, I would like to go over the opportunities aboard U.S. vessels and briefly touch on the Jones Act as it relates to the current size of the U.S. Merchant Marine, even though the Jones Act alone is worth an entire presentation by itself. I will go on to talk about the generational and cultural challenges of merchant marine recruitment and some tactics to address them. And I will finish with ideas on improving merchant mariner retention and ship-to-shoreside relationships. So, the Jones Act is worth a presentation all to itself, so this will have to be a brief overview of it as it pertains to merchant marine recruitment and sailing opportunities. So the Jones Act was passed in 1920, and it requires that any cargo traveling by sea between two U.S. ports must sail on an American-owned ship built in the United States and with a majority crew of U.S. citizens. For a more in-depth analysis, I highly recommend going to the Congressional Research Service and looking up Jones Act. There's a lot of great summaries that actually go pretty in-depth as summaries go. So as you can see on these two graphs, despite the Jones Act, the U.S. registered ocean-going shipping has been in a steady decline since 1950, and the total tonnage of U.S. registered shipping took a plunge in 2001 and has remained stagnant since then. And as you can see, whereas United States total merchant marine fleet size has been on the decline, or at least stagnant, China is expanding theirs, just as a form of comparison. So one explanation for the decline in American flagged shipping lies in the cost saving. Whoop, slide too early. Lies in the cost saving strategy of shipping under flags of convenience, which offer lower costs for vessel owners. This also benefits the country as it turns their vessel registry into an income source, as illustrated here for the Marshall Islands, the third largest merchant marine registry in terms of deadweight tonnage. This was an interesting thing that John D. McCown commented on. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Maritime Strategy. And it's very interesting for the Marshall Islands that non-fillet frozen fish is 4.62%, but whoa, most of their exports is from effectively outsourcing their registry. Now, the reason I mentioned the Marshall Islands, in addition to having lived there, and it's a beautiful place, highly recommend, Marshall Islands registry should be of particular interest to the decline of United States shipping, since until 1979, the Marshall Islands was a territory of the United States, and since 1986, it has been under the Compact of Free Association, along with Palau and Micronesia. Among other things, the compact has a provision for the United States to provide defense for the Marshall Islands in the event of war. As such, Marshall Islands flagged vessels should be considered as a logistics resource in the event of a global conflict. I know that opens up multiple cans of worms regarding a country, sovereignty and whatnot, but it's just food for thought. That's all I mean to say. It's very interesting that we protect the Marshall Islands, and yet it's one of as a flag of convenience. It's one of the reasons why the United States has trouble keeping its fleet size up. So another reason for U.S. flag shipping is not price competitive with foreign flag vessels is crewing costs. For U.S. flagship operators, crewing costs account for about 68% of ship operating costs, compared to 35% for foreign flagship operators. From 2000 to 2013, U.S. ship crew wages and salaries roughly doubled in real terms, increasing at roughly 3 times the rate of all transportation workers. As an actively sailing mariner, sharing this table from the Congressional Research Service feels like shooting myself and my fellow shipmates in the foot. So there is a link there at the bottom commenting on wage gaps in the global merchant fleet that elaborates on salary gaps among mariners and pay discrimination based around different nationalities and different ratings. That's certainly worth getting the full picture. But in a nutshell, the fact that foreign flag vessels have cost less, it's worth them bringing up, not bringing U.S. flag wages down. So that's all. That's what I have to say about that. So those first few slides were kind of bad news. So here's some of the possible solutions. Despite being 21st in total deadweight tonnage, the United States is actually 7th in terms of numbers of vessels registered and has the 3rd smallest average vessel size in terms of deadweight tonnage. These smaller tonnage vessels offer excellent introductions for new mariners. They consist of ferries, dinner cruise boats, coastal cruise ships, tugboats, offshore boats, and other workboats. So these are great entry-level jobs for the new cadre and the new generation of mariners. However, many workers are not required to have TWICs, Transportation Worker Identity Cards, or MMCs, Merchant Mariner Credentials. So employees treat it like any other service job. And I can speak from personal experience from working as a deckhand in 2008 with a coastal cruise ship company, where I was one of the few deckhands who even had a Z card. Many companies technically offer employees the opportunity to acquire an MMC, but the employee must pay for it to be reimbursed later. Companies need to start issuing TWICs and MMCs more readily, as well as offering full-time employment to ensure that maritime workers have an incentive to remain in the industry. The simple fact is that a TWIC card opens doors for the new generation of transportation workers, and subsequently, merchant mariner credentials open doors for the new generation of mariners. And that's me as a cadet with some of my other cadets. So this is something that's been in the news lately, the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel, the NSMV program. And it's been touted as a new build and shining opportunity for recruitment. Color me skeptical on this because I believe it will be marginally helpful at best for training opportunities. A purpose-built training vessel with a 600 cadet capacity does not match the reality of actual merchant marine vessels. Great Lakes Maritime Academy, where I received my maritime technology degree, as well as my 3rd mate's license, we had a converted ocean surveillance ship as our primary training vessel for our first summer sea project. As much fun as this first sea project was, after the subsequent summer sea projects aboard actual commercial vessels, many of us jokingly began to refer to that first summer sea project as Camp Maritime because of the simulated environment and lack of real-world application that comes from nearly 100 cadets all trying to learn about sailing aboard a 225-foot vessel. That's not to diminish that sailing summer. I just don't want training vessels to be seen as a as the main means of training. That said, as a training platform for passenger vessels, I'm sure the national security vessel will be great. And honestly, they are, reading their particulars, as a humanitarian and disaster relief vessel, they're going to be fantastic. But academy training vessels should continue to be converted former commercial vessels of all tonnages and previous uses, in order for cadets to hone practical merchant marine skills rather than go from a shoreside classroom to a floating one. Additionally, cadet time aboard active merchant vessels offers the best real-world classroom for a prospective merchant mariner. So, as an example, this top picture is of a former Army tug we had at Great Lakes, and you can see several cadets doing the classic, if mundane, task of chipping and painting. Just everyday vessel maintenance of an older vessel. The bottom picture is of me on the boom of the ATB X Ken Booth / Erie Trader during an unload in, I believe, Gary, Indiana. I spent 3 months aboard her in 2016, learning Great Lakes pilotage and observing firsthand what the realities of commercial sailing entails. So, yeah, there it is. So I thought this shot of me aboard the SS Badger, there in the white, would be a good picture, as it contains at least 3 or 4 different generations. Despite said generational and cultural challenges, it was a great crew to work with. So earlier this year, Deloitte published a report based on the millennial and Gen Z responses from a series of surveys about what the 2 youngest generations in the workforce care about when considering employment. I've sailed long enough to know that merchant marine culture is very old school and steeped in tradition, so the conclusions drawn from Deloitte's report might induce some eye rolls. But this is a survey of 22,000 respondents from 44 countries, so it is worth considering, even as a global study and not one specific to the American cohorts of millennials and Gen Z. So here are the conclusions from the survey that are most relevant for merchant marine recruitment. We've got confront financial concerns. This includes equitable pay throughout the different stages of an employee's career. I remember a coworker pointing out that because of inflation, a lack of an annual pay increase technically amounts to a decrease in pay. Just food for thought. Other key components of confronting financial concerns include providing mentorship, sponsorship, and learning and development opportunities to enable equal opportunities for growth. So, enable flexibility in where and when people work. This should be simple for the merchant marine vocation, since most merchant marine jobs do not require the mariner to live in the home port of the vessel where they work. Even if I've not worked globally, aside from my Cadet Sea project in Saipan, I can attest to this, having lived in Baltimore since 2017 and worked in the Great Lakes and currently offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. So no sweat there. Contend with drivers of stress and anxiety and eliminate the mental health stigma. The era of steel ships, steel men is over. Thankfully, many companies are taking things like work rest hours more seriously and ensuring that mariners have adequate means of communication to friends and family. And finally, address non-inclusive behavior. One of the best parts about working aboard vessels is how indispensable teamwork is to the continued functioning of the ship. Ideally, the culture aboard a merchant ship should be one of cooperation, and in the case of deck and engine officers, shared responsibility. Essentially, that there are no small parts in the ongoing operation of the vessel. There simply is no time for sexism, racism, or any sort of dangerous bias or bullying against another member of the crew. Addressing non-inclusive behavior should be one of the simplest. Sorry, I just saw some the. I'll comment on the SS Badger. Yes, I will. Addressing non-inclusive behavior should be one of the simplest millennial and Gen Z values that also align with extant merchant marine values. Unfortunately, there is room for improvement. This is one value of the Deloitte survey I wanted to highlight in particular, and that is concern for the environment. So, future challenges of decarbonized shipping requires mariners with a different set of skills, as Catherine Logie elaborated in an article for Sea Trade Maritime News. And I quote, "The Classification Society, DNV, it's a Norwegian classification society, published a report last November on seafarer training and skills for decarbonized shipping. It emphasized the need for training in leadership, language, communication, and soft skills, describing these as prerequisites to deal with the changes that new fuel technologies will bring. These will have to be managed through communication and negotiation, while tomorrow's seafarers may require a different academic profile." In the DNV study, it mentioned that the lack of new mariners with digital skills or a STEM background poses a challenge to decarbonization efforts. So this reality that environmental efforts in the maritime industry requires the help of younger generations forces the hand of both millennial and Gen Z activism, as well as the older baby boomer and Gen X generation of the old-fashioned way. The future of the maritime field will require an aggressive compromise between generational values as well as the active participation from younger generations, if said younger generations wish for positive changes in the maritime industry to take place. Hopefully I'm not throwing, as a millennial myself, I don't want to get angry. I'm going to get someone's going to send me some angry DMs on Instagram now. Aside from the Ever Given, so this is reaching the new generation of merchant mariners. And there I am on the ITB Presque Isle with Mo, who was the 8 to 12 wheelsman. Yeah, he was a great wheelsman, really nice guy. Aside from the Ever Given and Ever Forward incidents, global shipping and its contribution to the convenience of modern living is simply not thought about. Increased social media presence can help publicize the role of the merchant marine, as well as act as a recruitment tool. Many other industrial companies have a presence on social media that serves as both good PR and a recruitment tool. So rather than fear social media, bad publicity, distraction from work, etc., it's important to recognize its utility as a tool to tactfully reach a mass audience. So one of the vessels I sailed with for 3 seasons, the SS Badger, has a very active social media presence that highlights not only the everyday events during the sailing season, but also the people who make up her crew. I will admit, it might be easier to have an open social media presence for a historic car ferry / passenger vessel like the 70-year-old Badger, but there is no reason why other non-passenger vessels can't find a way to showcase the camaraderie, the work-life balance, the food on board, or even just a taste of daily life in order to drum up interest in not just the company, but the merchant marine as an attractive vocation. And the link right there that I believe is on the banner as well gives some really interesting insights from managers of personnel managers and CEOs and whatnot from a British perspective, but you know, it still counts. So regarding recruitment tactics, vocational training should be made more available at public schools. It should be better understood as a part-time collective responsibility among active or semi-retired maritime workers rather than the full-time job of a single vocational teacher. Students benefit from this in that they will hear about different types of jobs and locations that exist in the maritime field while still receiving proper maritime training. Also, vocational training coming from an active member of said industry makes that training that much more palpable for the student. And here, this is my second year as a cadet when we helped out with the first year cadets. So just a fun little picture. Another recruitment tactic would be the creation of a U.S. merchant marine recruitment centers akin to U.S. military military recruitment centers. Already we have MARAD offices across the country that are great locations for merchant marine recruitment. Also, a national 30 to 45 day program could be developed for the purposes of training recently credentialed OSs, ordinary seamen, wipers, entry-level engine, and SAs, steward's assistants, entry-level in the galley, with an emphasis on basic safety training, firefighting, healthy living, chain of command, professionalism, and teamwork. The Merchant Mariner oath is not particularly complex. We don't need to go full boot camp here. We're just giving a nice primer. Training programs should strike a balance between the realities of maritime work while emphasizing the unique nature that sets it apart from other jobs. Fair compensation, your time off is 100% your own, you get paid to travel, it's very real compared to other jobs in the social media age. Already, SIU has a Merchant Marine boot camp in Piney Point, one might say, and this is excellent training for unlicensed mariners going the MSc route. However, mariners face nearly 6 months of being away from home in their apprentice program. And what I'm suggesting is that alternative boot camps deserve to be created to address the wide range of commercial shipping jobs, not just MSc. So then, of course, we all know about the 6 state maritime academies plus our 1 national one. Admiral Busby commented in November 2022 that expanding the incoming class size of the maritime academies would help the mariner shortfall. I agree. I would just amend that. It should be alongside the creation of a QMed/AB program, qualified member of the engine department and able-bodied seaman, for new cadets, as there is an AB and QMed shortage just as pressing as third mate and third assistant engineer shortage. Effectively, this would mean the creation of an associate's degree program at the maritime academies in order to ensure that the unlicensed ranks of the Merchant Marine have a pipeline. This would also take into account another insight from the Congressional Research Service that said, quote, however, the number of available shipboard positions during peacetime may be insufficient to provide employment for all graduates if class sizes in maritime academies were to be enlarged as a result of increased funding. So, to quote Shakespeare on this, there are no small parts, only small actors. Unlicensed mariners, that there's a need for that as well. And I would be interested to see if an associate's degree created at a national level would help ameliorate that situation. So just to conclude recruitment tactics here, in terms of recruiting new mariners, greater emphasis should be placed on the variety of opportunities aboard all U.S. vessels, including and especially those of limited tonnage. Increased vocational training made available through public and private schools, as well as recruitment centers similar to military recruitment centers, would also contribute to the U.S. Merchant Marine achieving employment parity with the military and any other profession. None of this would diminish the 7 maritime academies or boot camp programs for unlicensed mariners, such as SIU Center and Piney Point. However, the maritime profession suffers from an overrepresentation of MSc and other, quote, long hitch jobs. So I'd like to conclude my presentation with some ideas on merchant mariner retention and strategies and ways in which ship to shoreside relationships might be improved. Also, if you'd like to hear other comments on the issues facing the Merchant Marine from another person named Kempton, feel free to reach out to my recently retired father and Naval Order member, Kempton Sr., seen here visiting me on the motor vessel Sam Laud in Cleveland in January 2018. So first, there is the offering of a company sign-on bonus, either in the form of monetary compensation or the inclusion of fully paid for training. Basic safety training, basic firefighting, maybe advanced firefighting, BPDSD, etc. If the entry-level mariner is missing classes, there would still be a reasonable company service requirement for the mariner to allow the company a return on their training investment. Right, tit for tat. Ideally, the mariner would have enough sea time either towards getting AB limited or AB unlimited or even QMed, so that by the time their obligated service is completed, the mariner is close to advancing in rank, hopefully compelling him or her to stay in the industry a little longer. Companies who continuously invest in employee training and continuing education never have to look for employees. My HR wife, when I read that to her, she said, "No, that's not always true." I said, "Well, it could be." And speaking of improvement of work-life balance, and here is my wife and I aboard the SS Badger during my first season with her, both the SS Badger and my wife. So this is an especially new value for mariner retention post-COVID. Mariners have recognized, every worker has recognized what really, no one's on their deathbed wishing they'd spent more time in the office. Even if it's a cool floating office, family matters. It's important, and many companies are moving towards providing an even time schedule available to mariners. 14 days on, 14 days off, 30 on, 30 off, 100 on, 100 off. I just caught up with a classmate of mine who's doing 100 on, 100 off. That's awesome. That said, some mariners prefer to sail 30 on, 15 off. The main emphasis should be on giving mariners a choice of schedules. The maritime industry is a candidate's market for the foreseeable future, so employers should probably acknowledge and strategize recruitment efforts that reflect that. Faulting mariners for wanting a better balance, or a better work-life balance, or looking elsewhere when their needs aren't met, or leaning too heavily on them to cover for the lack of reliefs is a risky game for companies to play in the medium and long term. A growing number of workers in a variety of industries are increasingly aware of their increased bargaining power with and without union help. See the current writers and actors strike. And the maritime industry is no different. I know that sounds like a very vague threat, but it's not. It's just workers are aware. These are good things. So going on to this is kind of dry, but the bureaucracy part of merchant mariner credentialing and whatnot. So the bureaucracy of the National Maritime Center and Regional Exam Center can unfortunately discourage new recruits and active mariners from continuing to sail because of the waiting time and poor execution of U.S. Coast Guard licensing policy. Earlier this year, there was a problem with the printer and laminator in Martinsburg. That's funny. It sounds like something out of a farce, out of a comedy movie, because mariners were talking about it on G-Captain and other sites, and it's kind of funny. But that's not the mariners' problem, that there's a delay here or delay there. So I would suggest that the Coast Guard should increase opportunities for retired mariners to remain in the maritime field by incentivizing or earmarking National Maritime Center and Regional Exam Center jobs to former merchant mariners rather than just another government employee. There are also some policy initiatives that companies can take and ways that national policy can incentivize companies to be better actors towards their maritime workers. For starters, tax breaks or other incentives for companies who hire shoreside personnel who have prior experience sailing, minimum 2 to 3 years of sea time. This encourages mariners to remain in and make positive contributions to the industry based on their experience, rather than feel misunderstood by shoreside personnel and having never had the opportunity to contribute to positive changes in company or industry-wide policy. This also encourages theoreticians and academics of the transportation and commerce industries to better understand the realities of the maritime world rather than going from the academy/college library to the cubicle or even a management position if the number of quality degrees are lucrative enough. Basically, I don't want to say don't cut in line, but it's not cheating. It's just this sort of gray area, I guess. It feels. This picture was taken right before I interviewed Admiral James Holloway for my sophomore history thesis back when I was still a mere academic of maritime miscellany. And for anyone curious, interviewing Admiral Holloway was just as incredible as you would imagine. It was a very cool day. I spoke to him about his time as CNO, even though I kept going down a tangent talking about his experience at Surrey Strait, which was like, I know I'm supposed to do one thing, but every story was gold. Anyway, this is actually, let me go back to that last slide for a minute. The world is feeling the tension of the transition from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy, especially in the maritime field. So rather than shy away from this, companies should attempt to smooth over the transition by making industrial experience, sea time, not just a preference, but a requirement for shoreside leadership positions. This also adds a sense of empathy or even just simple humanity to company culture and hopefully less of a hard-headed approach to a maritime company's bottom line. Just to comment on that, this is a quote from Mark Charman, CEO, Fast Stream Recruitment Group, had this to say. Singapore Maritime Foundation have done an excellent job of showing the potential career paths that young people could take in the maritime sector. I think that it's something that other countries need to embrace. I think it's something that large organizations will need to continue to push to make the sector interesting and attractive to young people coming into it in the first place. So taking the seafarers from cadet to CEO, showing them the opportunities that are available. There are so many paths that they can follow when they come ashore that are available to them in a wide range of companies in a wide range of locations. It's a truly global marketplace. Very exciting. So the part that I like best about that quote is from cadet to CEO. So now there's this very amusing New Yorker comic that just regarding knowledge economy versus industrial economy or white collar versus blue collar. This is just a very funny commentary on that. And it's ironic coming from the New Yorker because I have a sneaking suspicion that many of their readers make a lot of emails. So that's that. Last big idea, creation of the ESGR, of an ESGR-like organization, or which is the employee support of the Guard and Reserve for DOT workers, or the inclusion of DOT workers for the ESGR. This would contribute to a better understanding between transportation, maritime workers, and management. Understanding that some maritime work might be a bit part-time, comparable to the National Guard or military reserve units, fostering better understanding between maritime workers and indeed transportation workers in general, and whatever other job they might have would also be beneficial to the maritime work environment. That's why I have this picture of my dad during his time as chaplain on the Western Rivers. He's presenting a Merchant Marine flag and Ohio flag to the motor vessel Buckeye State. And just outside of his contributions to mariner spiritual and mental well-being, I always found this component of my dad's distribution of Merchant Marine flags to different vessels to be one of his most sincere gestures. It fosters a sense of kinship and pride aboard U.S. merchant vessels that no matter the tonnage of a given ship or boat, every vessel and every member of her crew can feel part of a larger national maritime tradition. And on that note, there's my grandfather and father and Admiral Holloway's A4 Skyhawk. So that concludes my presentation. 3 generations of maritime, of the maritime vocation in that picture. And anyone has, let me just comment on the Badger. Yeah, she did have a ramp casualty. I haven't been there since 2021, but they hope to have a good season in 2024. So that's, everyone's good there. So let's see. That concludes my presentation. So
excellent. Well, thank you for that background, Kempton. We have a comment from David Foote, who also thought it was an excellent presentation. And David, I'll just reassure you that very shortly after we end the recording, it will be available on the Naval Orders Continental Commandery's website. If you look at our YouTube channel, you'll be able to find it as the most recent recording. So yes, it will be available on YouTube so that you can freeze it and copy down those very long links.
Yeah, I apologize. And I also have I'll have to upload my list of sources as well, because it's all gold. I mentioned the Congressional Research Service a few times, and I'm still at the heart of it, still have that history major instinct of always having Every source that touched this presentation is I have a list for if you'd like to learn more.
So speaking of lists, you use a number of acronyms where folks who aren't in the merchant marine may have not heard them before. So I'll, for example, tell us what a Z card actually is.
A Z card is the early form of a merchant mariner credential. Off the top of my head, what the Z stood for,
nothing. Z.
Was it Z? Okay, because MMC stands for. That's the thing. The Z cards are no more, as far as I know.
Oh, okay.
They've been replaced by merchant mariner credentials, which are a passport-sized thing that looks like this.
Right. Then used also mentioned the Twix card.
Yes, a transportation worker identity card. That is a post 9/11 creation that in theory, it's supposed to, all transportation sites are supposed to have a card reader, but they don't.
Okay, and AB, able-bodied seaman?
Yes, AB, able-bodied seaman.
QMED, quartermaster?
Qualified member of the engine department.
Qualified member of the engine department. Excellent. Okay, let's see. There are a couple of other questions coming in. Teeing up for your future talk on the Jones Act. Should it be repeated?
No. No, it is. This is, if we were to repeal it, it would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that's not to say, from time to time, I know that especially in light of hurricanes, it gets renewed attention. And thus far, there are those little caveats get addressed in a pretty efficient manner. But my biggest concern with repealing the Jones Act is that companies would take advantage of this. And quite simply, if you want to see a foreign flagged vessel coming up the Mississippi, then by all means repeal the Jones Act and just see what happens. It's too easy. Absent the Jones Act, I don't trust that it wouldn't be taken advantage of, or that that's pretty much that. And not to mention the national security implications.
Right. So unintended consequences from a national strategic perspective.
Yes.
It's imperfect, but as Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's the least imperfect of the options available.
It absolutely. And with regard, the shipbuilding component of the Jones Act can certainly be tweaked, and I think we're finding ways towards that. So, there are ways to tweak. Tweaking does not mean repealing; it just means tweaking.
Right.
So
speaking of tweaking, you had to go for second baccalaureate because there's nobody offering a master's in maritime services. Would you like to speak to your thoughts about should the maritime academies be offering advanced degrees in maritime sciences?
They are offering an increasing number. So I went to Great Lakes with an accelerated program because so it took 3 years for a second bachelor's rather than 4. So credits transferred over. Master's degree would help, would be useful, but there's no replacement for actively sailing. So I'm content thus far. I'm 35. I feel all right with 2 bachelors and not a master's, and I don't know if that'll change. But for that, a lot of maritime academies are offering master's degrees, and these are good things because there is advanced learning to be found in transportation and commerce, but not at the expense of actually doing it. So yes and no. Yeah. It makes bachelor's, masters.
Doesn't matter. Let's move on to another topic you touched on, and as a fuel guy, over the past decade, we in the fuel sector have been having a lot of conversations about the shift to ultra low sulfur diesel as a marine fuel requirement. And the European Economic Union is requiring that. U.S. is moving in that direction. If we haven't already moved there, how is that shift towards lower emission fuels, especially ultra low sulfur diesel fuels, affecting you from the operational side, if at all, as a ship driver, as opposed?
Well, admittedly, I'm deck side, so I have engineering friends of mine who could comment a lot more in regarding the decarbonization efforts. And the reality of global transportation is that it's here to stay, and and like I mentioned in the presentation, if we're going to decarbonize, it's going to require smart people. It's going to require the STEM sciences. It's going to require that all that activism within my generation and the younger generation. It's going to require very shrewd scientists to continue to reduce sulfur emissions, to continue to, I mean, that I'm sure some folks have seen the design for a sailing vessel with these large wind.
Right. She just launched out of, was it Liverpool earlier this week?
Yeah. I haven't seen most of the thing is just kind of the obvious amusement of, wow, we've come full circle. We started with sailing and now and that's fine. These are different. Anyone who sees the design sees it's a whole other new ball game, and it's wind powered, but in a different way. And I had a cousin who I talked to about using algae as an alternative fuel source. Everything's on the table, including existing diesel fuel, and as we sort of take the sulfur out of it. I don't know the nitty gritty of that, but in order
I won't get started on that.
It's
same thing when you mentioned algae. You know, in the lab it's pretty easy to generate oil from algae.
Mm-hmm.
The scale up is a bear because algae are good food for bacteria, and keeping your on a mega scale, keeping the algal cultures from becoming infected and no longer producing the yields you need. Also, it's very water intense. So again, whole other conversation for a whole other program. We're talking about merchant marine compensation, and the sense I get is it's competitive within the U.S., but one of the challenges is to pay a U.S. merchant mariner. You are, for a given pay grade, you're paying a lot more for a U.S. licensed mariner than you would for a foreign mariner. Is that parity really the issue? And is merchant mariner pay as compared with number of days on the job per year and number of hours on the job per year? How does that shake out? Because when you just look at annual salaries, it can be misleading with a like being a merchant marine.
So the expectations, I think that the U.S. merchant marine is generally on the safer end comparatively, and that's not to I don't know. That's compared to other merchant services. The other two flags of convenience. The thing to remember, especially with flags of convenience as well, is that the ship is subject to the laws of that country, including ones related to wages, safety, and taxes. So I don't think Liberia can barely manage itself, let alone ships registered under its flag. So and yet it makes up the vast majority. And you have people who sail. You have Filipino and Chinese and Ukrainian mariners, and I say those nationalities because they make up a significant portion of the international merchant marine population. So, is it yes? The U.S. merchant marine is fairer, is safer, and that's I for lack of a better term, it's the I don't want to say it's the price of doing business, but it's the price of doing good, clean, efficient business.
So turning that around now, considering how you're compensated versus your peers that might be in other fields, as a market, let's say a land electrician or a land plumber or a land tradesperson of any area,
Mm-hmm.
are they being paid on par or better than their counterpart that might be serving aboard a merchant ship?
So you're talking about just a plumber, electrician,
Well,
skilled
comparable
laborers.
skills, that
Yeah,
obviously they're no land navigators.
right.
So, as a deck officer, I think there are fewer analogous, maybe a stevedore, maybe a person that supervises crane operations in the
Mm-hmm.
construction industry. But, in terms of your peer group,
Yes.
how is
So,
merchant marine compensation?
well, you pick up in terms of skill set. It is skewed in favor of engineers, and I know this because my closest friend from Great Lakes got his third assistant license and is currently a power plant engineer with the University of Michigan. So the skills that you pick up at any of these academies, at any of these, or even in the merchant marine, you could sail for a bit. You can I would say it's easily transferable in terms of skills from going from the merchant marine on an engineering side. There's a lot more give and take there. You could be a shoreside electrician and hop aboard a ship, and vice versa. There's a lot more free flowing. Uh,
To clarify the question is,
yeah,
let's say, um, is merchant mariner compensation fairly competitive, or do you feel as though it's lagging behind comparable fields where you're not spending time out at sea?
I would say it's. I asked my wife this as well. I would say it's fairly competitive, considering that uh, the biggest reason why it is competitive is because it's very clear cut. No matter what rotation you're on, you're either working or you're not. I've done a handful of shoreside. I've done jobs where work can follow you home at night, where you can get a late night phone call. It's rarely, if ever, like that with the merchant marine, especially when whether you're out of a union hall as a relief mate, whether you're working long hitches where you're doing 100 days on and 100 days off. During those 100 days off, you can be fully present. Uh, it does require the companies to care about the work-life balance. It requires the mariner to commit when they're on and commit when they're off. But the balance can be found, and as such, that when the balance is found, it's worth every penny. It is fair. It's competitive compared to other jobs, and it's something that, and the flexibility that's possible. And I say this when I first graduated, I was a relief mate, and there I was able to work as much or as little as I wanted. I set myself the goal of sailing on the lakes for at least 180 days. I had classmates who pushed for more if they and they were were younger, and I didn't have a sister's wedding to go to that I did. So it's what you make of it, and that amount of control is does set it apart in a positive way, I think.
Time for one more question, and you had mentioned this, and maybe you can elaborate on it a little bit. Could community colleges adjacent to maritime geography do more towards offering associate degrees in merchant marine? And again, I guess part of that would be another piece that you mentioned, retired merchant mariners serving as adjunct or full-time faculty members.
Absolutely.
Is any of that happening?
I know that I just spoke with a professor or the head of the transportation department at the Community College of Baltimore County, and they're looking to set that up as part of their larger program. So things are moving in that direction. The real issue, and this maybe refers to labor laws and whatnot, is how much part-time can work out, because there is that sort of balance, as I mentioned in my presentation, that having a recently retired or someone who's even actively sailing, it makes it real to the mariners. So absolutely, they could have it wouldn't even need to be a full degree, because getting credentials is quite literally as simple as a checklist, which is great, because I mean, we had that in Boy Scouts. So if you can,
Sure.
So.
Sure. Excellent. Well, again, Kempton, I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your insights. It's always great to hear from folks that are still within the experience. I hate to use the word immersed, because we want you to stay, unless you're a submariner, we want you to stay above the waterline, especially as a deck officer. So again, thank you again one more time. Next month, we are going to be trying something totally new and different. Our guest speaker will be another one of our newest companions, Marco Tullio, who is a veteran of the Italian Navy, and he is going to be sharing about the experiences of one of our NATO allies, the Italian Navy. The details of his presentation are still being finalized. We expect to be able to post that announcement up on the Continental's website in the next week or two. I anticipate then we will, rather than telling you when the live presentation is, we'll let everybody know when the recording will be available for viewing. So I look forward to seeing you all next month. Again, one more plug for the National Congress. It's going to be a terrific Congress. We're going to be attending a Marine Corps Recruit Training Depot graduation. I believe it's one of the milestone graduations. We'll also be spending some time aboard the Midway. And many of you recall our several presentations from docents of the Midway Museum. And so looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible in San Diego in October. And with that, I want to wish everybody a great rest of your day or evening, wherever in the world you may be.